The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Faustin-Archange Touadera, President of the Central African Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Faustin-Archange Touadera, President of the Central African Republic, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, heads of states and governments, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to join my voice with all of those who took the floor before me here in this rostrum, and also tell you, Mr. President, that we congratulate you very warmly on being elected to preside over the 72nd regular session of the General Assembly of the United Nations, and to wish you every success as you discharge this noble duty. I would like to also, with your permission, express towards your predecessor, Mr. Peter Thompson, our deep admiration for the enormous amount of work he's carried out and the remarkable outcome he's managed to achieve during his mandate. It is also time for us to welcome the work already accomplished by Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, what he has been able to do since he arrived at the helm of the organization. Mr. President, the 72nd session of the General Assembly of the United Nations takes place at the time where our planet is confronted with many challenges, and amongst them the issue of international terrorism, which is particularly acute. Everywhere insecurity appears, be it in the Middle East or in Africa, going through Europe, everywhere international security is threatened by terrorist groups of all kinds. And that is why I solemnly call upon the international community to redouble efforts and to pool our efforts and our means in order to put an end to this scourge. On the issue of migration, the north of the African continent is shaken by the many victims who are abandoned in the desert or disappear at sea. This phenomena in the Mediterranean, with the tragic consequences in its wake, is a major challenge which is calling out to us all. Furthermore, the question of refugees has recently been worsening to the point where it become one of the priority concerns for the international community and requires very special attention on our part. On the issue of climate change and sustainable development now, our planet continues suffering the consequences of natural phenomena such as earthquakes, floods, droughts, rapid desertification, and global warming, which is a real concern. Here, I would like to remind us all that the state signatories of the Paris Agreement on the climate change, I call upon all of you to honor the commitments undertaken during COP21 as regards the efforts we all need to make in order to preserve our environment. On the reform of the United Nations, here the Central African Republic, as a member of the African Union, supports the common position of member states of that organization, which was adopted in Malabar by the Group G11, on the need to widen the Security Council in favor of Africa. Other challenges are also exist, and this includes human rights, the rule of law, and good governance. These are all necessary preconditions for social well-being. And I can assure you that the Central African Republic, my country, will continue bringing in its modest contribution to our joint work to promote peace, security, and lasting development for which we all hope. Mr. President, I welcome The theme chosen for the current session of the General Assembly, focusing on people striving for peace and a decent life for all on a sustainable planet, which illustrates very well the importance of the place of human beings in the agenda of our organization, and tallies very well with the Sustainable Development Goals which were adopted here in on these premises in 2015, and whose goal is to reduce poverty in half by 2030. Today, within the framework of national reconstruction policy, the Program for Recovery and Peace Building in Central Africa places at the core of its priorities our nationals as human beings. This program, with the support of technical and financial partners of my country, has enabled the government to put together an appropriate institutional framework in order to conduct and follow up and evaluate the SDGs within underscoring those goals that we deem to be priorities. Mr. President, this session of the General Assembly of the UN provides me with an opportunity to describe the situation the Central African Republic finds itself in, and I would like to do so. During the Donors Conference in November 2016 in Brussels, I mentioned the dream I have, which I share with my compatriots, and it's to have a country, a Central African Republic, which is diverse and reconciliated within itself. This plea of ours led to an unprecedented mobilization of international solidarity towards the Central African Republic, and this has been shown in the plan I just mentioned. And in order to implement the Recovery and Peace Consolidation Plan, we have concluded an agreement between the Central African Republic and the international community. It is through this constant dialogue amongst partners within this framework that I presented here in New York on Tuesday, the 19th September 2017, the progress we have made as we are implementing the commitment we undertook within our recovery plan. So let me mention some of the aspects here. On the issue of peace and security in our country, the government of the Central African Republic mobilized all of its energy in order to consolidate the process leading to the cessation of hostilities, all of hostilities, and throughout the country. It was done as a result of laborious efforts, and by doing that, we've managed to ensure that 14 armed groups now participate in the Advisory Monitoring Committee, and they're also part of the DDRR program. This committee has just successfully held its seventh session on the 3rd and the 4th of August 2017. As we search for peace, we have accepted the contribution coming from the Sant'Egidio community, which led to the Accord of Rome on the 19th June 2017. At this opportunity, all of the armed groups had the opportunity to reconfirm their commitment to the territorial integrity of the country, to our common values, and the constitutional principles of the Republic. Despite this important stride forward, we deplore the violation of some armed groups of their commitment to immediately cease hostility throughout the national territory. My government unreservedly condemns this kind of senseless violence which continues impacting innocent civilians. In order to give all of its vigor to the peace process and to make sure that our steps are consistent and bring in the support from our friends, we supported the harmonization work towards peace in Central African Republic, and this resulted in the adoption of the roadmap for peace and reconciliation in Central African Republic, and this was done in Libreville on the 17th July 2017. We want to welcome this major step forward. It marks a firm commitment of neighboring countries, the African Union, ECOWAS, and the ICGLR to the success of our continued search for peace. I would like to also welcome the very promising outcome of the first meeting of the facilitation panel of the African Initiative, which took place in Bangui on the 11th of September. And here I would like to reaffirm my firm commitment to the African Initiative, as well as my commitment to ensure that it's successful and that will benefit my compatriots. And this is done to the satisfaction of the friendly countries and the organizations which support us. Already it has become a unique federating framework for peace and reconciliation under the determined leadership of my government. When it comes to the implementation of the DDRR program, the work carried out by the Advisory Monitoring Committee continue, and the program has just launched a pilot project which was launched on the 30th of August 2017. This was a major step forward. It applies in its first step 40 ex-combatants from each of the 13 of the total of 14 of armed groups, and will do everything to ensure that the success of this pilot project be a very good illustration of our true commitment to peace, because we firmly believe in peace and this faith is unshakable. At the same time, we are trying to rebuild a national army to make sure that it's representative, professional, and Republican within the framework of this security sector reform. This is based on the national security policy and the political consensus. This also takes into account the threats we have to security, values, and the Republican principles. This ought to guide the state in its sovereign mission to guarantee security for all. In this spirit, the support offered by EUTM has provided for the training of 2 battalions now ready to deploy. And our friends and brothers have showed their tangible solidarity by welcoming some Central Africans in training. This is in line with the relevant provisions of the Security Council. In order to strengthen domestic security, 500 policemen and gendarmes were hired with the support of Minusca. When it comes to justice and human rights, here I would like to say is that we have been largely concentrating on making our special criminal court operational, also training our prison wardens and improving our judicial and penitentiary infrastructure. My government places high priority on national reconciliation, but the reconciliation is impossible without justice. Justice, which is something that many victims require. The redeployment of the administration in the prefectures is also one of the major and urgent priorities. And here, in this, we've been supported by international community. I welcome the redeployment of certain staff in the various localities of the countries and the means already invested in the rehabilitation of public infrastructure. Again, with the support of our friends throughout the United Nations, the government initiated the Bambari pilot project in order to mark the restoration of state authority. It is through this process of redeployment throughout the territory that we will step by step make sure that we are as inclusive as possible. Now, on the financial governance. The efforts made by the government are providing encouraging results which need to continue with more rigor within the context of a country which has not entirely exited the crisis which used to tear it apart. The agreement signed with the IMF in June resulted in a number of agreements in order to improve our effectiveness and strengthen the way we manage our public finances. We adopted measures in order to streamline our tax apparatus to make sure that our budget process is transparent and our budgets reduced. The result of the second review of the IMF in July of this year confirms that we are moving back to the path of good financial governance. Economic recovery is another area where we pay special attention. The long crisis had a disastrous effect on production and led to a very high level of poverty. The absence of economic opportunity and prospects resulted in the fact that some of my compatriots joined the ranks of those who trade in violence. The reconstruction of the Central African Republic will remain an illusion for as long as production is random, informal, and is beyond any kind of government control. For the time being, we have undertaken some measures, and this includes the commitment of my government to build the DDR program in such a way that all of the energies which were negatively employed earlier be reinvested in a way that's more profitable to the nation and bring communities up. And in this regard, the primary sector, agriculture and animal husbandry are at the very heart of our efforts. The use of natural resources, which is a sector where we need to have very vigorous activity, needs to be brought entirely under the government control. It is recognized that our country is full of immense riches, but this will only remain a vain slogan if this has no positive impact on the daily lives of our citizens. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all of these actions and advances are there, but we need to remember the humanitarian situation, which has worsened in many parts of our country because of the upsurge of violence, because of ferocious competition for the control and illegal use of the wealth in the soil and subsoil of my country. Today, we have 2.4 million people requiring emergency humanitarian assistance. We also have 600,000 IDPs who need to be supported and assisted to help them move back to their homes or start being productive. Furthermore, we have in my country 500,000 people who are refugees in neighboring countries, and we need to do everything to make sure that they're brought back home. The humanitarian crisis that we are going through is a factor which aggravates the complexity of our political situation, and this is a peril that we need to overcome. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in the upcoming days and months, I would like to share with you the main areas of what we're doing within the mutual engagement framework. Under peace and security, what I will be doing is I will mobilize all of my energy to make sure that by the end of 2017, we have started establishing dialogue with the armed groups and start implementing the national DDR program. The firmness of my commitment is without doubt. Nonetheless, whilst we're having this dialogue, we all know that the state has to continue functioning. And in particular, the state has to continue ensuring the safety and security of all of its citizens. The efforts in the deployment of our army and security people requires appropriate means for doing that. And that is why I would like to, on behalf of my people, invite in the most solemn manner the Security Council, the political organ of the United Nations, which is entrusted with ensuring international peace and security, to use all the means and ways it has in order to ease the conditions of equipment of our security and defense forces, to create the conditions for the restoration of peace and security in the Central African Republic, and to therefore consolidate our democracy. When it comes to political, administrative and financial governance, we are going to strengthen our dialogue with all of the national actors and provide political support to the implementation of the roadmap for peace and reconciliation in our country. Our most ardent wish is to be able to conclude this dialogue in 2017, so that the new year be the year of prospect and peace. In this regard, I call upon the African Union, the ECAS, and the ICGLR to act swiftly and accelerate the deliberations of the facilitation panel. I'm only going to commit myself to the work in the area of justice and reconciliation. The preparations for the implementation of transitional justice should enable us to make the year 2018 the year where we do that, and therefore our citizens will have an opportunity to talk to each other in a candid way and to make truth come out and decide to move forward towards a brighter future. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, briefly speaking, this is our situation. This is the work that we're doing constantly for peace, reconciliation, the reconstruction of the Central African Republic. And my commitment for peace and security is full. On the other hand, I'm sure you know that the Central African state has limited capacity. Today, in addition to our own weaknesses, we deplore the fact that even the staffing of Minusca is not sufficient in order to protect all of our civilians. The heightened security threats linked to the violence from armed groups means that provisions need to be made to make sure that the crisis does not become general in nature. As I've already pleaded for the easement of the equipment conditions for our army, I also call on the international community to increase the military staffing of Minusca, given the immense territory we have to cover. I also ask that its mandate, which very soon will expire, be reviewed and strengthened so as to help the legitimate country to regain the control of those areas which have natural resources wanted by several groups beyond control. I would like to express the gratitude of the Central African people to the brotherly countries who sent peacekeepers to my country. I pay tribute to the memory of those who perished as they were conducting their noble and dangerous mission of peace. I wish every success to our deliberations, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you of my country, Central African Republic. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank His Excellency Faustin-Archange Touadera, President of the Central African Republic. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the head of state.